What's up, guys? It's a joy to be able to spend a couple of minutes with you guys tonight as we spend some time in the Word together. And tonight, I want to take just a couple of minutes to turn your attention to Psalm 139. And Psalm 139 is a psalm that we've read time and time again. And I think that our tendency with passages and books of the Bible that we've read over and over again is for us to really just disengage and to not pay attention to what's actually being spoken here. And so tonight, I hope that if that's your default, if that's what you tend to do in moments like this, and I hope and pray that you would, for the next couple of minutes, just turn that off and focus on what Psalm 139 says here. We believe that this is God's word. We believe that it's inspired by God. And so therefore, we can see something about God here in Psalm 139. And so I want to look at the first 6 verses and find some points of encouragement and challenge for us as we look at this tonight. So let's read this, and then we'll just talk just for a few minutes. He says, "O Lord, you have searched me, and you have known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and you are acquainted with all of my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all together." Guys, as we look at these first 4 verses, I think that what we see, if we sort of back off from this for a second and not attempt to see ourselves in the passage, but if we look at this passage and realize that the Bible is a story about God, what does this show us about the character and the nature of God? Verse 1, you search me, you've known me, you know when I sit down, you know when I rise up, you discern my thoughts. So not only do you know where I am, but you know what I'm thinking. But then he carries on in verse 3 and 4, and he talks about how that you know the words of my mouth. Even before I speak them, you're aware. In all of my ways, you are acquainted. You know them very, very well. So if we back off and look at what this has to say about God, what I think it shows us is that there is nothing that God does not know, that God is unbelievably omniscient. God is all-knowing. You know, Romans 11 has this great doxology at the end of like the chapter where Paul just breaks out into this song almost, where he talks about the wisdom and the knowledge of God and how that no one can really understand it. And all of that points to the reality that God is unbelievably omniscient. He knows everything from the small details of your life to the major things that are happening here in the world. There's not one single area that God is not aware of and mindful of. So God is omniscient. So what does that mean for you? That means that there's not a single area of your life that God doesn't know about. In the moments where you feel like no one can know you and understand you, God's very aware. God's very mindful. He's acquainted with your ways. Carry on in verse 5. Here I think we see something else about God. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. So here's this picture of the writer, David, here being almost like pocketed in by God's protection. So before David and behind David and all around David is God's protection. And so here's this idea that I think is mentioned here that really God is eternal, that he has always been and he always will be. So even before the foundation of the world, like God was. And even now, like in the midst of what we're facing, like God is and God will always be. So there's not one single area, one single detail of our life or in any of our lives where God does not reign as eternal. That means that there's not one thing that God is not caught off guard by. So even when COVID-19 came on the scene just a couple of months ago, like that wasn't something that caught God off guard because he was aware, he was mindful, he's always been. So how is that encouraging to you? I think that you look at your life and you think about what's lying ahead. And some of you guys are working through what's it going to look like for the rest of the school year for you, or what's college going to look like if your senior year this year is sort of jacked up with not being able to finish out like you thought that you could finish. So you're looking ahead and you're sort of fearing what's to come, but realize and know that God is already there. God is already mindful. And God will be there as you are getting to that point. So be encouraged by the presence of the Lord that is eternal. And then lastly, as we look at verse 6, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's high, and I cannot attain it. Here you've got this understanding that God is, how we would say, like incomprehensible, that we can't know fully, like how God operates and how God works, and fully know the mind of God. But here's what we do know, is there is great hope and great confidence in the fact that even though God is incomprehensible, he knows you and me, and he knows the depths of our sin, and yet in his goodness and in his grace and in his good plan, what he did for you and for me through the gospel is unbelievable. That here's this perfect and holy God that could do anything that he wanted to, and yet here he sends his only son to live this perfect life that you and I could never live, to die the death that you and I most definitely deserved, to be buried and risen from the dead victoriously, that by faith in him we might be brought into this union and relationship with God. The gospel is incomprehensible. So guys, as you look at Psalm 139 verses 1 through 6, don't let it be a passage where you put yourself into the passage, but let it be that this shows you and highlights who God is. God is omniscient. God is incomprehensible, and God is unbelievably protecting and eternal. Guys, as you look at that tonight, I pray that your heart and mind would be encouraged, and I pray that you guys have a rest of the week that is awesome. Thanks for tuning in.